Welcome to Beyond the Desk Admin Advocates, where we explore what it truly means to be an administrative professional in today's world. I'm Melissa Mahoney, CEO of the International Association of Administrative Professionals.
And I'm Rachel Suman, CXO of IAAP. We're not just leaders in this field. We're advocates, champions, and former admins ourselves.
That's right, Rachel. This podcast isn't your typical industry talk. We're here to bring you real conversations, real stories, and real solutions.
From AI to self-awareness journeys, we're here to discuss the deep issues that admins face every day, drawing from our own experiences and those of our community.
So whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out on your administrative journey, join us as we explore the highs, the lows, and everything in between.
Get ready for authentic insights, candid conversations, and a whole lot of inspiration. This is Beyond the Desk Admin Advocates.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 4 of our brilliantly new podcast. This episode we have teased for you in a previous episode and feel like it is very important and time for us to talk about IAAP's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging philosophy. We really want to take this higher level. We did a bit of a deep dive on a previous episode and promised you that we would come back to this topic. So here we are. So a couple of things that we're going to talk through today just to set us up. We are going to share with you some of the definitions and language, talk more about the language that we use at IAAP, share a little bit, I think, about Rachel and I's personal why inclusion is such a huge priority for us. We've also talked about that throughout all of the episodes of our podcast so far. And then we'll talk a little bit about the business case for support for DEI and what that can look like inside of the workplace. So I think we'll kick it off by sharing IAAP's philosophy of inclusion. And some of this we are actually reading directly from our DEI strategic plan, which IAAP does have. It's posted on our website. So if you'd like to go read the full plan, you can find it out on the About IAAP page. It is posted there alongside our strategic plan, and the strategic objectives of our DEI strategic plan have been embedded into our strategic plan. So it is one and the same part of our priorities. We have pulled those objectives and laid them into our strategic plan to ensure that we are constantly monitoring progress and we are focused on those objectives at all times. So let's talk first about IAAP's philosophy of inclusion, and that is that it is a human need to belong, that IAAP aspires to be a community that embraces diversity, increases the sense of belonging for members and stakeholders, and drives engagement. So that is our philosophy, the why IAAP is prioritizing DEI. So let's talk a little bit more about the language, and I think this is really important as we define the language we use, because even just this language has become a source of conflict, and especially in American society, but even beyond America here, this is a global issue. The terms and the language we use around even just the term DEI can be very polarizing. So I think it's really important that we talk about the language we're using and provide you the definition so you understand what we mean when we say DEI, when we say belonging, when we say diversity, equity, inclusion. So Rachel, would you like to jump in with some of our definitions?
I would love it. Thank you. So DEI, obviously, as you just said, diversity, equity, and we have inclusion and belonging under the I, and we'll talk a little bit more about belonging and why that is. Diversity, we define as differences in ability, age, color, ethnicity, gender expression, gender identity, height, language, national origin, marital status, political affiliation, race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, veteran status, weight, and other characteristics that make us unique. I love that last word too, right? Unique, it ends on a really great note. Equity, we define as equal access, opportunity, and freedom from discrimination or prejudice on the basis of ability, age, color, ethnicity, gender expression, gender identity, height, language, national origin, neurodiversity, marital status, political affiliation, race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, veteran status, weight, and other characteristics that result in inequitable access. Additionally, for IAAP, this includes equity among different positions, work settings, or aspirations. And last but certainly not least, inclusion and belonging we define as deliberate efforts to ensure that our organization is a place where differences are welcomed, different perspectives are respectfully heard, and where every member feels a sense of belonging, which is feeling valued, trusted, connected, and informed, and inclusion. So belonging and inclusion.
Thank you. And I do think it's really important. I know that's a long-winded definition, but I think it is a necessarily long-winded definition. The more specific that we can be, the better. And it is not an all-encompassing list. These are definitions that are constantly evolving as we start to uncover and recognize some of the biases and blind spots that we didn't know existed. They are blind spots because we literally don't see them until someone uncovers them. So that is true even as we being society navigate this work. We are constantly expanding the concept and ideas around what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging mean and how they are defined, what they do include, what those biases and spaces of inequity actually are. We constantly are uncovering new ways that shows up for us as we start to listen more and better, as we become more active listeners, as you start to approach things from a space of curiosity and openness, you start to see there are things here that we didn't even recognize or realize. So even these definitions will continue to evolve. So they're not all encompassing. There might be some things missing on this list, and we are very, very open. If you think that the list should be or could be expanded, reach out to us and let us know how else you would add to that list, or if there's something specific you believe really deserves a call out in our definitions. We want to be as clear as we possibly can so that there isn't any opportunity for misunderstanding. We want people to explore their own feelings around the language that we're using. And if we can define it better, it allows you to explore better. If you understand this is what we mean when we say equity, and here are all the things that encompasses, and you have a feeling about the term equity, you can explore that feeling better equipped if we give you a better definition of what that means. So that really is our intention around defining it as well as we possibly can, and also recognizing and understanding there will never be an end. This will constantly be evolving. We will constantly update the definitions and how we define it, including adding or expanding, as you mentioned. Our I stands for inclusion, and we've added belonging to that because I think we've even expanded our understanding of what it means to be included,
right,
and feel like you belong in a space, in a community, and even defining what that means, feeling trusted, feeling valued, feeling connected. So it does not mean that you find yourself in a place of same. It means you find yourself in the space of connection. And often that happens in the places where we actually do have a very diverse group of people coming together and recognizing just because we have unique things that are unique about us or things that are different about us doesn't mean that we can't create meaningful connections with one another. In fact, they become really impactful and meaningful because we recognize there is some similarity here. We have things, we are both human. There are things about being a human on this planet, those experiences that we have, there's a lot more we have in common than we have differences. We just tend to focus and zero in on the differences.
Oh my gosh, you just read my mind. I was just thinking that, honestly, because we look at this list that I read and we're like, gosh, that's a really long list. And I think it just highlights our negativity bias as humans. And that's not we all have it. That is hardwired into our brain. We have a negativity bias that tends to look more toward what is different, what is, other, what is all of those. And you're right. Like we all have so much more in common than we have difference. And hopefully this list, I agree with you, the expanding is so essential. And even in that, I think it's very possible that somebody heard one of the things on this list and are like, I didn't even think about that as an opportunity to be exclusive or other or whatever. So we're all on a journey and we're all learning and growing in this space. And there's absolutely no judgment about where you are on your journey of inclusion and belonging. We just invite you to start the journey.
Absolutely, yes. And it is an invitation, and that really is kind of central to IAAP's philosophy around DEI. And I think that's why it's so important, why we are really pushing this definition and this language, featuring the language so much as we uncover this topic for you, because we want this to be an invitation. So I don't want people to hear DEI and feel something and then say, this isn't for me.
Right.
I'm not interested in this, because I think there is actually value. There's a space here for everyone, no matter what your experience is. There is opportunity here, and it is a judgment-free zone. We really do try to practice that. We've talked about that in several episodes around this judger. We've even teased it, this concept of being a learner versus being a judger. That's a real skill, a real skill set, and it takes a lot of practice to recognize when you're in judgment and then shift yourself out of judgment back into more of a learner mindset. That is very helpful as we start to navigate this conversation around DEI. That opportunity to be curious and be in that learner mindset is a great way to get yourself into the journey, put yourself on the path. If this language is very foreign to you, or you don't even know what you don't know, just approaching it from a space of curiosity, I think is a great way to enter the conversation.
Absolutely. And I think even taking that a step further, even these are not meant to be labels in any way. So I think part of even the judger mindset, like we've talked about, it can be very easy to honestly pick out anything in that list that we said and said, this person is this. And that is not at all like we want to set the record straight. Like, this is not about labeling people. This is not about saying this person is this one thing. It is that's why I love the word unique so much, because we all have so many different parts that make us who we are as people. So I love that we list out this, and this only addresses one aspect of somebody's humanness. So, we think about somebody wanting to put somebody in a group or in a box or in a bucket. Like, we need to recognize everybody's unique humanness and recognize how that makes them the person that they are, instead of discounting or dismissing aspects of them that is different than us. Does that make sense?
It points to the very reason why this is such a critical priority for us as a humankind, because what we're pointing out here are actually parts of people that become barriers to that experience we're talking about, the experience of being included and valued and connected. These are parts of people's identity who we have either historically, systemically, or it's happening actively in our society right now. All of those things are true about multiple parts of that list. So the goal here is to uncouple those pieces, those individual parts of people's identity with the idea or their lived experience on this planet. It's often a barrier to them being included, to them feeling valued in a workplace, in a grocery store, in their daily lives. So unpacking and understanding how these parts of our identity have created such a box or a defined space, or we've judged it either as a people group, we've assigned something to it. And the reality is, to your point, we all have lots of different parts of us. And walking into a room and being judged by one part or even three parts of our identity and then immediately put into a box is not going to create a space of someone feeling connected, someone feeling like they belong, and someone being truly included in decision making, in an experience, in access to something. And when we really get at the heart of this, we are talking about people who are being prevented from access to critical basic human rights, basic human needs, things like healthcare, things like housing, things like food and shelter. When you really dig at the heart of this, that is the why of it at the very core, at the very base. So I don't want to overgeneralize the topic or get too high level and talk around the real issue. And that really is at the heart of it. So I believe what you were pointing to really is the real issue. The real heart of the matter is we cannot define people by, people are not defined. We can, unfortunately, we do define them by these very distinct parts of who they are, but we should not be defining people because there's a whole human in every single one of us that is filled with all kinds of things, all kinds of knowledge, all kinds of experiences, all kinds of relationships, all kinds of cultural impact, cultural background, all sorts of context. We all carry that unique experience of our personhood. And to define someone and then limit their access to basic human rights or needs because of these few characteristics that we've defined, it's unfair is not even the right word.
It's bigger than
it's
unfair.
Inhumane,
yes.
I think is the best way to describe it. And we're preventing people from experiencing the greatest basic need we have is to be connected, is to belong. It is on the hierarchy of needs for a reason. So I do think you're pointing to the very core, the heart of the issue.
Yeah.
And the reason why this is such a big priority and why I believe that no one on the planet can excuse themselves from this conversation, no matter what your background is, no matter what your context is. I think we all have to show up for this conversation. It is that big of a priority, and it is at the foundation of everything we do, everything IAAP, all of our strategic priorities. It is at the core of every single one of our goals. You can find it. If you pull on the thread of any of our strategies, you can find DEI is at the center of an issue, of a challenge, of an opportunity.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that's really important that I think we've mentioned in another episode, but we need to say it here, is I know that DEI can bring up some feelings of guilt. I'll label it as guilt. I think it can be very easy to fall into that. And while that's valid, like that's not what we're advocating for. Guilt is not a helpful emotion. Guilt does not lead to action. So when we talk about DEI, when we talk about belonging, when we talk about all of this journey that we go on to learn more about inclusion and what that has meant in the past, because it's important to recognize the history, kind of how we got here, and it's important to take different actions in the future. And that does not come with a sense of guilt or blame or any of that. Like, this is, like you said, and it's so true, this is an invitation to learn more, to quote Maya Angelou, to know better and to do better. So I think it's important that we call that out, because it can be a very easy emotion to fall into when we discuss this topic. And that's not what we're saying. We are inviting you to come to this space to create even more belonging, specifically the world, as you said, but even IAAP, like come on this journey with us, come in this space with us so that every administrative professional, every, advocate of administrative profession, whatever it is, feels a place of belonging here in our community. That's what ultimately we are hoping and aspiring to and seeing in the future.
Definitely agree with that. And I was also thinking, as you were talking about that, there's a real opportunity here to acknowledge that you were talking about the guilt and the blame, to acknowledge that it is a very valid reaction and response when you discover that you have unintentionally, generally is the way that happens, excluded someone else, or you've othered someone else. And when we say othered, we mean an experience where you are in a circle of people who have an experience and someone is on the outside of that experience. When we say othered, that is what we mean. When you find out and discover that you have created that experience for someone else, you excluded someone because of one of these defined attributes, it is a very valid response to experience some guilt, to experience some own judgment of self, where you sit with that judgment of, how could I have done this? But to your point, Rachel, there's no action in that space. So we're inviting you to explore that, acknowledge those feelings as they come. They're real. That is a real human response and reaction to finding out you've done something quote unquote wrong. And the reality is, we're inviting you to even stop judging it as right and wrong. If you didn't know, now you know. So I think that was a brilliant quote. It is exactly aligned to our philosophy. And if you can find a support system, this is also where the community comes into play. If you can find a support system, people who you can rely on to say, here's where I am, here's what I've unpacked. I'm really struggling to get out of this feeling of guilt and judgment for myself. But I know that's not serving me. I know that's not serving the community. Help me. I just need to talk it out. That's a great opportunity for you to really explore that. And then once you reach the point where I'm ready to take action, that in and of itself can be really liberating to know, okay, I got it. I understand why I feel this way. And I really do want to do something different, do something better, take different action. Not only is it liberating, but it is literally how you move into that action space. It's less about the physical action and more about the mindset and the paradigm that you have. So once you make the decision, I want to take action, that's the liberation you experience, where you're like, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. I don't even need to know what that action is in order to decide I want it to exist.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And it can also be overwhelming when you see, like you said, when you learn, when you kind of really step into this space, it can be overwhelming because you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much. Like, I need to do this. I need to do this. I need to do this. And also not helpful, a very valid reaction. I have been in that space. I see you. I 100% get it. And one interaction, like just take one interaction and then the next interaction, and then you start to see even more opportunities. I was thinking about belonging actually while you were saying that, and I was trying to picture like what that could possibly look like. And the analogy that came to my head is, let's say you get invited to a party, which is inclusion, but belonging is actually having someone move over and have you sit next to them, like making room for them, creating space for them. You're at the party and there's a huge table and everybody's eating, and somebody actually moves over and says, hey, come sit by me, come sit here. And it doesn't matter who you are, like they just made space for you. I feel like that at its core defines belonging. And it doesn't have to be this huge fanfare thing. Sometimes it is, and sometimes there are amazing activists in the world that are moving in great ways, and that is not dismissing them. And it can be a small, quote unquote, small, air quote, as making space for someone in your life to say, hey, come sit here. Tell me about you. Tell me your story. Let me learn more about you. How have you been? If you know the person, like what's going on? How can I support you? That's the picture, a giant table, and we're all making space for each other.
Yes. Yeah. And I think ensuring that when you make space for someone, you're also seeing them, because we tend to move through our life sometimes on autopilot, especially in the admin role, because we have so many priorities. We've talked about the versatility of the role and how incredible that part of the role is. And it also puts us in a space of we're constantly moving. Sometimes you do get to a place where you're just on autopilot. So ensuring that you actually do see someone, you talked about engaging with that person, that's going to actually create the belonging so that they aren't seated there in silence. And the way that we've talked about that in the administrative profession is thinking about a boardroom, and you've been invited to the room, and maybe you've even been pushed up to the table in your seat in your chair, but are you actually being included in the conversation? Or are you sitting there because you're taking minutes, you're taking notes, you are recording action items, you are listening from your admin space, which is 100% valid and probably why you are in that room. And you also have an incredibly valid perspective. You have ideas and thoughts and a very unique perspective that most of the people in that room don't have. So are they asking for your input, especially when it comes to priorities and things that are going to need to be filtered through a lens that you have? So that to me is what belonging looks like from an admin's perspective in the room. Are they listening to you? Are they inviting your knowledge to be shared in the space? And that doesn't mean that could be one time in a meeting. It doesn't mean you're talking throughout the entire meeting, but it does mean that they understand your presence there. They value and understand your role, and they understand that you have a perspective that creates value in the space of decision making, in the space of strategic thought and planning, that your perspective is valued and valid. So I think that's, for me, what it looks like in the workplace for admin. And I think even, in general, it shows up in our daily lives as well. So the way that it transfers to our entire being is highlighted in those two examples.
Absolutely.
I know we talked briefly at the onset that we would touch on our personal inclusion whys. So I want to jump over to that topic really quickly and say we both do have very personal connections to, why this is a priority for us, why we can talk more about our own personal journey in this DEI space, but I really want to save that for a future episode when we can deep dive and really get into some of the stories and some of the experiences we've had personally on this journey. I think that's a great future episode, but we didn't want to gloss over the fact that we both do have very intimate stories around why this is a critical priority for us, and we do want to share those with our listeners. Just want to save that when we can. We're long-winded clearly on all of our episodes, so we really want to give it the time and space that we know it needs, and we recognize we don't have the time in this episode to dig deeper. We'd be here for 2 hours. So
well, and I think yes, 100%. And our invitation to you is to find your own personal connection. And we want to talk about the business case of why we believe DEI is so important, not only for IAAP, but even in your own workplaces. And all of us have someone in our lives that this touches, that this impacts. And if you don't have someone in your life, we encourage you to look, to be curious, to learn more about this, because I think that's where the heart comes in, is when it is you. Like there's that ethereal place that is like, yes, this impacts humans and this impacts people, and we are generally empathetic people, and so we can identify with that. And then when it connects with you personally, it connects with someone that you love, that you care about, that you respect, whatever that is, it changes the game, and it makes DEI, it makes belonging, it makes all of that like next level. It just takes it next level.
Yeah, it really is the connector between philosophy and practice.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a brilliant way to showcase the why. And like I said, we will talk about that from a more personal perspective in a future episode. We're just keeping you on the hook, keeping you hooked for future episodes.
In the best way.
Yeah, let's talk about the business case, because there is legitimate evidence that supports the business case or the return on investment to organizations to invest in DEI priorities and to prioritize these theories and principles inside of a workplace. So we've got a few examples. This is not all encompassing by any means. We tried to pick the ones that we felt like were super relevant to our audience. So to the admin audience. So I'll kick us off with the first one, and then Rachel, if you want to take the second one. So the first thing that came to mind was the experience of decision making. And this shows up, I think, specifically for admins in meetings, because we are often in a meeting, there to take minutes, there to take notes, there to kind of decipher action items, make connections between all of the things that are happening inside of those meetings. And when you think about decision making and meeting management, generally speaking, we focus on consensus building. We find comfort. It feels really good when you have a discussion and reach a decision that is in consensus. There's not a lot of conflict around it. There's not a lot of challenge. That actually feels really good in the moment, in the meeting. But the reality is, when we do have discourse and we do have challenge and we do have different perspectives, and in fact, we don't have consensus necessarily, when there is difference in the room, there are different perspectives, there is civil discourse, there's conflict in the space of decision making, the outcomes take longer to reach. It doesn't feel good. There's a lot of navigation of conflict. Our conflict resolution skills need to kick in. You tend to have to engage those emotional intelligence muscles in that type of decision making space, and the outcomes 99% of the time are better, more rich outcomes because of the discourse, the conflict, the different perspectives, the challenges, things that you would not have even thought of in the space of consensus, because it was a very similar mindset. Everyone felt really aligned to a decision. That's actually a sign that we need a little bit more diversity in the room, and we need to create a space of inclusion so that people feel safe and valued enough to speak their mind, even if it is in opposition. So that's not an easy thing to create, but there is a business case in terms of the type of outcomes you get when you have diversity in meetings and decision making.
Yes, absolutely. And the other business case speaks more to the individual and the humanness that we talked about. But, mental health is such an important topic. I mean, we have a month dedicated to it now, right? Like, mental health and the impact to our mental health when we do not belong, when we are not valued, and we have to show up at a job every day that doesn't recognize our humanness or our uniqueness, can lead to some very severe outcomes. So on a scale, like one side, you've got high turnover, right? Like the quote, people don't leave jobs, they leave people, like that's real. So if you have a culture that is not inclusive, welcoming, a culture of belonging, people aren't going to want to stay, or the people that want to stay are all sane and are all alignment. And that speaks to what you were just talking about. And on the other side of that spectrum, you have some really severe, we're talking about depression, we're talking about absenteeism, we're talking about suicidal thoughts. Like there are some really extreme outcomes that can come from creating and sustaining a culture that is not a culture of inclusion and belonging. So, to get a little more trite, air quote, if I can use that word, like there is a money side of this, right? Like high turnover costs a lot of money. And to make it more deep, we're talking about people's personhood. We're talking about people's health. We're talking about people's well-being. And all of that can be impacted when you have a culture that does not support someone's whole self coming to work and being able to be their authentic best self, whatever that shows up for them in any of these spaces that we in the definition talked about.
Yes. And I want to be really clear that mental health issue is clinically documented. Like there is a very real connection between inclusion and belonging and the lack of inclusion and belonging and the impacts that has on mental health, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. Those are all things that increase exponentially when someone doesn't have a space or feel connected, included, and does not have a space of belonging. So the people case is very clear and high. And to your point, the business case, the profitability of it very much relies on people. And we know that. So I think that is 100% aligned. And I think especially for people in the administrative field and profession, the cost of turnover to an employer is very high. From a black and red point of view on the P&L statement, it shows up. To the administrative professionals who often they fill the gap. So we are often gap fillers when there's a vacancy in a role or vacancy in a position. So there's a real connected people impact to the administrative profession, which ties directly back to our business case. Our philosophy, the why IAAP feels and knows this is such a high priority for us, because it does have tremendous impact on the profession we serve, which then has an impact on all people.
Business. Yeah, absolutely. Business and people, 100%. Well, clearly we could talk about this for another 3 hours and never get to the end of it. And we will do another episode. But I think if I can say it again, and you said it too, like we invite you into this journey with us, and know that you are welcome here. You don't have to be a member. You don't have to be an admin. You don't have to fit into whatever space. You are welcome here and you belong here. And we hope that you feel that. And if you don't, please reach out to us. Let us know. We would love to have a conversation with you about what that looks like, because it is so knitted into the fabric of who we are, and nobody ever arrives. You said it, right? Like this is not an arrival. We have not gotten to this space of end, or, hey, we've done all of the things. It's a journey. It's a constant journey that we are working on. So we hope that we get to see you around the community and welcome you. And if you have any questions or comments or feedback for us, we'd love to hear it.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Beyond the Desk Admin Advocates. We hope you enjoyed diving deep into the world of admins with us.
Remember, this podcast isn't just about listening. It's about taking action. Whether it's advocating for yourself in the workplace or supporting your fellow admins, let's continue to elevate this profession together. If you have any thoughts, questions, or topics you'd like us to explore in future episodes, don't hesitate to reach out to us on social media or through our website.
Until next time, keep pushing beyond the desk. And remember, change begins with you. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.